This is the true story of a woman my age abused as a child. All the words I use are her words. The interviews you will see with professionals who work to protect children are conducted by her. This first programme looks at her life up to the age of 11. I think my mum hit me from being a tiny baby. I've now got a baby myself, and my mum told me when I was pregnant to hit him where the bruises wouldn't show. I think that's what she did to me. I don't ever remember meeting a nurse at primary school.
I'm quite surprised there wasn't a school nurse at the primary school, because nowadays each school has a named school nurse who's involved in the PSHE and who usually has a drop-in at the school, and it's available for every pupil to go and talk to, and you can discuss various issues, anything you're worried about or anything that's troubling you at home, and we would have been able to pick it up like that. I think very much that we're seen as part of the school but not the school. We're not social services and we're going to immediately be taking children away or be very punitive. I think we're much more seeing as a sort of more open, perhaps more caring is not quite the word, but we're just sort of a little bit apart from the school staff, so they can see us not in that authoritarian place, if you like. So I think we've got a really important role there, where we go between social services, between the school. We've got really good communication with both. So, and often people will tell us things that they're just a little bit too worried to sort of tell school or to tell social services. I truly hope that story of never meeting a school nurse until 11 is unique and never happens again, because hopefully all the school nurses, especially in this area, every school has a school nurse, and a young person wouldn't find themselves in that awful position without having somebody to talk to.
From around 6 years old, I was doing all the jobs, washing the pots, cooking tea, and putting my younger siblings to bed. Doing all the things the adults should have been doing. I even had to walk to school across a busy main road by myself because my mum was still in bed.
Children at 6 should not be coming to school unaccompanied. I would expect parents, staff to let me know if they thought that any children of that age were coming to school unaccompanied. In fact, children of 11 are supposed to have parents here with them or a friend until we open the gate at 10 to 9. When I think about you being 6, I can understand how it possibly wasn't followed up, because human nature doesn't want to accept that mums will do that to their children. And if you haven't got cast iron proof and you are very, very sure, it's actually very difficult to set the wheels in motion. And sometimes there almost has to be not a tragedy, but things have to get that bad before you can get enough agencies involved. Once they're involved, you can transform adults and children's lives very, very quickly once you get the support in. But it's everybody coming together.
Sometimes I was very unhappy, but I had to put on a brave face, because if Mum ever found out that anyone had any suspicions about what was going off at home, I'd have got a beating, so it never got picked up.
In my experience, best practice is about adults being trained so that they notice signs, any sign, any differences, any change in behaviour, whether someone's unusually quiet, whether they're not dressed the same, all sorts of things. Just tiny, sometimes they're tiny, but they're really, really crucial. It's about children being comfortable and confident that if they do talk to somebody, then they're going to get something back. It's about the curriculum allowing you or other children to accept that not everybody's life's the same, and if they're not happy about something, they can talk. It's about caring. It's about adults caring enough about those children that they fight for them and they notice the little bits.
My mum always made sure that we looked neat and tidy so as not to draw attention to ourselves, and so no one would realise what was really going on.
You've got to, as a teacher, look at the whole behaviour of the child, whether there's anything that's new, that's out of character, unexplained absences. But I think the main message is to know your children in your class, and know when something's not quite right, and to question that, and not to just sit on that information but to share it. Because what's been shown time and time again from inquiries into the death or the severe injury of children is that information is not shared, and it's one of the most important aspects of preventing abuse of children or death of children at the hands of their parents or carers. Information has to be passed on, and also, of course, it has to be acted upon. And if it isn't acted upon and there are still concerns there, then you need to question why that information wasn't acted on, because a child's life could be at risk.
My mum used to say a lot of stuff, that if people ever knew what was going off at home, we'd be put into a naughty girls' home, or she'd give us away because she didn't want us, or we'd be put into foster care. Anything to scare us into keeping quiet.
In my experience, most children do find it very difficult to speak out, whatever the level of abuse is. There are all sorts of reasons for this. There's a feeling of wanting to protect their parents, however bad they may be being treated by their parents. There's a concern that it may have been their fault, that they did something wrong, and that's why they were being abused, whether it's physical or sexual abuse. And it's difficult to actually disclose to anybody unless you trust them, and unless you know that you're not going to get into trouble, and that your mum and dad aren't going to get into trouble either. And for that reason, it's extremely difficult for children to actually tell their story about what's happening to them, until sometimes it's too late, unfortunately.
It's very hard to get young people to have a voice, and quite often in front of parents they don't have a voice. For many reasons, it's not easy to talk up in front of your parents when social services arrive, when a social worker walks through the door, and quite typically when children speak to us more or better is when parents give us consent to maybe do a piece of work at a child's school, away from their family home. But as you can imagine, for a parent to give that kind of consent, our concerns must already be quite grave, or we must have a substantial amount of evidence or information coming in before we can give the parents a bit of that push to say, actually, you don't have much of a choice here. We're going to go see your child at school, and we'd prefer to do it with your consent, but the threshold has to be quite high to give parents that kind of push. So, for example, if a child phones in, or if a neighbour phones in and says, I heard a child crying next door, it wasn't a normal kind of cry, or when she visits me, she always presents as hungry and unfed. I'm giving a few scenarios where people might typically report to us. We might visit the household on the first occasion, but when we get there, the child might present okay, and it might take 2 or 3 or 4 referrals before we are able to say to parents, look, this isn't the first time, you're not resolving it. So I wasn't altogether surprised about your experience. I think what is always terrible is hearing how long you had to suffer, and that through your childhood nobody had picked it up and nobody had been able to help you.
I never went to friends' houses, so I didn't see how other families lived, but I knew I wasn't a happy child. I don't remember the school ever asking me how I was or how things were at home.
There are 4 levels of abuse that a child may be being subjected to. They are physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. Now, the ways that a teacher will be able to pick up on the signs that a child may be abused is that they are in a good opportunity to actually know how a child behaves on a day-to-day basis. And if they notice a change in that child's behaviour, they are the best place to actually approach a child and ask them, I've noticed a change in your behaviour. Is there anything going on? Is there anything you'd like to talk to me about? And to let the child know that they are always there when the child is ready to talk to them. Some teachers may feel concerned about reporting abuse, as may do other professionals. It's an exceedingly emotional subject and sometimes difficult for people to hear about a child being abused. what the NSPCC would promote is that it's essential that teachers feel skilled and able to listen to a child who may disclose abuse, and that would be encouraged if they were actually going through regular training, either as a teacher who comes into a school as a newly qualified teacher, it must be part of their induction, and that they have a regular training programme so they are skilled and confident in listening to a child who may disclose about abuse.
My mum used to hit us a couple of times a week, sometimes just a slap, other times she'd punch or kick. You never knew what was coming or what she'd do. Everything I went through seemed normal, but me and my sister went through it, so everyone else must.
Your mum was a good liar and made you feel that everybody's life was like that. What I would hope happened here was that we would see through that. So children, if they're quiet or if their behaviour changes or anything that is almost an instinctive reaction to a child, we will follow up. What I also would hope is that any child found at least one adult in school that they felt confident to talk to. It might not be their teacher, it might be an LSA. So that you could have the conversation and maybe not feel so isolated by what your mum was saying. Things like PHSE and circle times and assemblies often spark things off in children and they will then say something. So I think teachers and heads, we need to create enough opportunities in school so that you felt almost slightly uncomfortable about what was happening to you, but then felt confident to talk to one of us. That's what I would hope would happen.
Any teacher who has a concern about a child in their classroom should not be thinking about alienating parents. The most important point is to ensure that that child is safe when he or she goes home at night, when they're at home at weekends and when they're at home during the school holidays. And it's very difficult for teachers, I think, to actually challenge parents, and it's not necessarily their job. That's the job of social workers in children's services. And if teachers have concerns, worries, something that's been bothering them for some time about a child, they shouldn't sit on it. The most important thing is to share that information with the head teacher or the person in the school who has responsibility for child protection. And that should then be shared with children's services, and the social workers there are trained and it is their job to deal with it. It's a delicate balance, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is to ensure that a child is safe.